Elijah Turner had just returned from studying abroad, eager to experience the Grand Palace Hotel, the epitome of luxury that his mother, Olivia Turner, owned. Though he had seen this hotel in countless magazines and business articles, this was the first time he would be visiting as a guest. He had spent years abroad, and now, back home, he was excited to see the legacy his mother had built. The towering hotel gleamed under the sunlight, its marble pillars framing the entrance and golden chandelier glistening through the glass doors. A red carpet stretched into the grand lobby, where well-dressed guests moved with quiet grace, the image of wealth and privilege. Elijah rolled his suitcase across the pristine marble floors, walking through the grand entrance, expecting the kind of treatment that came with such opulence. But as soon as he stepped inside, something felt off. It wasn't the luxury or grandeur, it was the way people looked at him. Eyes flicked toward him, quick and assessing. The doorman hesitated before opening the door. The bellhop glanced at him, then turned away, as if assuming he wouldn't need help. Behind the reception desk, the staff didn't greet him either, their faces unreadable. Despite it all, Elijah kept his posture straight and walked confidently toward the front desk. There sat Amanda Blake, the hotel manager. She was in her early 40s, dressed in a navy blue suit, her expression businesslike, her eyes trained on the computer screen. When Elijah approached, she didn't look up immediately. "Excuse me," Elijah said politely, offering a small smile. "I have a reservation under Elijah Turner." Amanda's eyes scanned him briefly, his designer sneakers, tailored trousers, and crisp shirt. The moment her gaze landed on his skin, her expression shifted just slightly. There was a flicker of skepticism, but she didn't offer him the warmth she had given the guest before him. "You're sure you're in the right place?" she asked, her tone cold, professional, but with an underlying dismissiveness. Elijah's patience remained steady. "I believe so," he replied calmly, pulling out his phone. "The Grand Palace, correct? Here's my confirmation." He handed her his phone. Amanda snatched it from him, quickly inspecting it before handing it back without looking at the computer. "Humph," she muttered, clearly unimpressed. She began typing on the keyboard slowly, as if searching for a problem, not a solution. Meanwhile, other guests checked in smoothly, receiving their key cards in minutes, while Elijah was left waiting. Minutes passed, then 5. His patience began to wear thin. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. Amanda glanced up, as if surprised he was still there. "It seems I can't find your reservation in the system," she said flatly, still not meeting his eyes. "Are you sure you booked here?" Elijah tried to keep his voice even. "I have a confirmation email. Would you like to see it again?" Amanda sighed, clearly annoyed. "That won't be necessary," she said. After a long pause, she added, "We don't allow walk-ins for high-tier suites." Elijah's jaw tightened. The assumption was absurd. "I'm not a walk-in," he said firmly. "I have a reservation under Elijah Turner." Amanda's thin smile remained, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I don't see it in the system. You might want to check another hotel." Her words stung, but Elijah knew this wasn't about the reservation. This was about who she thought he was. Without another word, he sat down in the lobby, patiently waiting. Elijah sat in the lobby, his suitcase by his side, as the minutes ticked by. The lobby buzzed with the quiet hum of activity. Guests checked in, bellhops moved swiftly with luggage, and the distant clink of glasses echoed from the bar area. But Elijah, seated near the polished marble pillars, felt as though the world around him had turned a little quieter. He was no longer just a guest, he was an invisible presence, dismissed without reason. The silence in the air grew thicker. Every few minutes, an employee would pass him, but none stopped. A waiter moved between tables, offering drinks, but not a single glance was directed at him. Even the guests around him seemed to ignore his presence, stealing glances but quickly averting their eyes. The more time passed, the more the weight of being overlooked settled in. An hour had gone by when Elijah stood, brushing non-existent dust from his trousers. He made his way back to the front desk, where Amanda was still sitting, her eyes glued to her computer screen. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I've been waiting for over an hour. Can you please check my reservation again?" Amanda looked up, her gaze cool and calculating, as though she had been expecting him to make another move. "It seems I'm still unable to locate your reservation," she said, in a tone that suggested she had already written him off as a non-issue. Elijah's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "I showed you the confirmation earlier. The reservation is under Elijah Turner. I'd like you to check it properly this time." Amanda's lips twisted into a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I already told you, we don't allow walk-ins for high-tier suites. Maybe you've mistaken this hotel for somewhere else." A slow burn of frustration began to rise within Elijah, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm not a walk-in. I'm a guest who booked in advance." Amanda ignored his words, turning her attention back to her screen, her fingers tapping leisurely on the keyboard, as though she were more concerned with making the process as painful as possible than actually resolving the issue. Elijah stood there, watching her stall, as the minutes stretched on. His patience was beginning to wear thin. The unfairness of the situation grew ever clearer. The longer he waited, the more obvious it became that the issue wasn't his reservation, it was something deeper, something that Amanda was too eager to overlook. Around him, other guests continued to check in effortlessly. A family of 4 moved past, each of them warmly greeted and ushered to their rooms without so much as a second glance at Elijah. A businessman stepped up to the desk, his reservation confirmed within moments. No one made him wait. No one questioned his presence. Elijah took a deep breath, trying to hold on to his composure. He wasn't about to make a scene, but the humiliation of being treated this way was starting to build. He had waited patiently long enough, been courteous and polite, but his time was being wasted. Finally, he cleared his throat and said, his voice now cold, "I've waited long enough. Either you check my reservation properly, or you give me a valid explanation for why I'm being ignored." Amanda's gaze flickered briefly, and for the first time, she seemed mildly perturbed. "You can wait in the lobby while I check it again," she said dismissively, before turning her back to him. It wasn't a solution, it was another delay. Without another word, Elijah turned and walked back to the seating area in the lobby. He could feel the eyes on him as he moved, the whispers and stares from the staff and guests alike, but he kept his head held high. He had nothing to prove. As he sat back down, the sting of the treatment didn't lessen, it only grew sharper. The waiting, the ignoring, the dismissing, another 20 minutes passed, then 30. Elijah's patience, once steady, was now beginning to fray. He could hear the constant buzz of conversation around him, the clink of glasses, the soft footfalls of guests walking past, but it all felt like a distant hum, as if he were in a separate world, one where he didn't belong. He glanced up at the reception desk once more. Amanda Blake was still absorbed in her work, her fingers moving mechanically across the keyboard. She hadn't even looked at him since he returned to the lobby. It was as though he no longer existed in her world, only an inconvenience to be dealt with when it was convenient for her. Elijah leaned back in his chair, trying to steady his breathing. He had experienced his share of subtle discrimination before, quiet glances, unspoken judgments, but this was different. This was deliberate, calculated. He had done everything by the book, arrived with his reservation confirmed, but somehow, he was being treated like an outsider. Behind him, the lobby continued to pulse with activity, with people coming and going, checking in without issue. A couple with matching luggage strolled past him, greeted warmly by the staff. The bellhops smiled at them as they entered the elevator. Not a single word was spoken in his direction. As the minutes dragged on, the weight of the situation grew heavier. Elijah had always prided himself on his calm composure, but he could feel the slow, simmering frustration beginning to rise. He checked his watch. It had been over an hour since he first arrived. He had every right to expect basic respect, to be treated as any other guest would be, but instead, he was left to sit and wait, ignored and dismissed. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice from behind the desk. Amanda was finally speaking again, but her words only deepened the frustration. "You're still here," she said, her voice flat, barely masking her irritation. "I told you it might take a while. We have a strict policy here, you know." Elijah clenched his fists at his sides but said nothing. He didn't need to respond to her jabs, her actions spoke louder than her words. At that moment, a new group of guests approached the desk, an older couple with luggage in tow. Amanda's demeanor immediately changed, her tone softening as she greeted them. Within moments, their reservation was confirmed, and they were handed their key cards with a warm smile. The contrast was stark. Elijah was still standing there, waiting, not a single word directed at him. The longer he stood there, the more he felt the weight of the injustice pressing down on him. He had done nothing wrong, he was simply here as a guest. But the assumptions about who he was, about whether he belonged, were being laid bare before him. As the minutes continued to stretch, a subtle sense of humiliation began to take root. The lobby, once a place of luxury and comfort, had become a cage Elijah was trapped in, a moment that felt both unreal and painfully familiar. He had seen this before, the way people treated him differently, the way assumptions were made based solely on the color of his skin. He had grown used to it, but that didn't make it any less painful. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Elijah stood up again, his body stiff from the long wait. He walked back to the front desk, his steps purposeful. He wasn't going to let this drag on any longer. "I've had enough," he said, his voice steady but firm. "You either check my reservation properly, or I want an explanation." Amanda barely looked up from her screen, her gaze still fixed on the keyboard. "As I said, we're very busy," she said, her voice dripping with insincerity. "Maybe you should check elsewhere." Elijah's patience was wearing thin. This wasn't just about a reservation, this was about respect, and he wasn't going to be treated like this any longer. Elijah just stood there, his frustration boiling under the surface. He had waited long enough, endured the humiliation long enough. He wasn't going to take another minute of being ignored, dismissed, and belittled. He took a deep breath and was about to say something when the doors of the Grand Palace Hotel swung open with an almost theatrical force, drawing everyone's attention to the entrance. A sudden hush fell over the lobby. In walked Veronica Turner. Her presence was undeniable. She moved with the quiet grace of someone who commanded the space around her without effort, as though the world bent to her will the moment she entered. Dressed in a striking crimson power suit that fit her like armor, she exuded an aura of control, strength, and authority. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floors, the sound cutting through the silence, every step deliberate. Elijah recognized her immediately, though he had only seen her in corporate meetings and from afar. She was his mother, Olivia Turner, the woman who had built this empire, the woman who, with her vision and determination, had created a hospitality dynasty. Her eyes, dark as onyx, scanned the room with the sharpness of a predator hunting its prey, the intensity of her gaze sending an involuntary shiver through the staff and guests. Amanda Blake stiffened, her entire body locking into place. She had made the mistake of underestimating Elijah, and now the person who owned the very foundation she stood on had arrived. Veronica's presence was enough to stop conversations mid-sentence and freeze the entire lobby. The moment her eyes locked on Amanda, everything in the room seemed to slow. Veronica didn't need to speak, her gaze alone sent a message, a warning. Amanda tried to gather herself, but there was a crack in her otherwise composed facade. The weight of the situation, the sudden shift in power, was too much for her to ignore. "I find this entire situation highly suspicious," Veronica said, her voice cutting through the tension like a hot knife through butter. It was calm, collected, and carried an authority that left no room for dispute. Her eyes never left Amanda's face as she addressed her. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Elijah stood behind her, the corner of his mouth lifting ever so slightly in acknowledgement of his mother's arrival. There was something reassuring in the way Veronica carried herself, an unshakable confidence that had the power to dismantle everything Amanda had built in the last hour. Amanda opened her mouth to speak, but Veronica cut her off before she could say a word. "You've been stalling my son for over an hour," she continued, her voice smooth but laced with a simmering edge. "You've treated him as though he didn't belong here, as though he were some kind of intruder." A few of the staff exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one dared to move, too paralyzed by the sheer authority Veronica exuded. "I'm not interested in excuses, Amanda," Veronica said, her tone turning sharper. "I want you to explain yourself." Amanda's face had drained of color, her earlier confidence seemed to have evaporated, replaced by a visible anxiety that was almost impossible to ignore. She fidgeted with her hands, struggling to maintain composure. I was simply following hotel procedures," Amanda stammered, her voice losing its edge. "There was no reservation in the system under Mr. Turner's name. I thought it was a mistake." Veronica's expression remained ice-cold. "It was no mistake. This is Elijah Turner, my son, and I will not have anyone in this hotel treated like an outsider, especially not him." Her words rang in the air, as if she had just set down an ultimatum. The weight of the situation was clear now, there would be consequences. No one in the lobby could miss it. Amanda opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was trapped, caught in a lie, and now the truth was standing before her, as undeniable as the power that Veronica commanded. Elijah didn't say a word, but he could feel the shift, the moment Amanda had realized her mistake, the moment the narrative she had tried to build began to unravel. The silence in the lobby was suffocating, all eyes were fixed on Veronica as she towered over Amanda, her presence commanding the entire room. Elijah, still standing behind her, felt a mix of emotions, relief, anger, but most of all, gratitude for his mother's unwavering defense. He had been humiliated, ignored, dismissed, but now everything was about to change. "You've lied to me," Veronica's voice was icy, deliberate, and unyielding. "You told me there was no reservation under Elijah Turner's name." Her eyes flicked to the surrounding staff, and they all shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. "You ignored him. You let him sit here for over an hour. You treated him like he didn't belong, and now you're trying to cover it all up with excuses." Amanda took a hesitant step back, her face pale, the weight of her actions sinking in. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but the words seemed to stick in her throat. She knew it was futile, she had made her decision, and now she would have to face the consequences. Veronica turned to Elijah then, her sharp eyes softening for just a moment. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice quieter, more gentle. Elijah nodded, though the lingering frustration in his chest hadn't quite eased. "I am now," he replied, his tone steady but with an edge that still held the sting of what had happened. Veronica turned back to Amanda. "You've made a mistake, and I'm not going to let this slide," Veronica said, her tone turning sharper. "This isn't just about you treating my son like this. It's about the culture you've allowed to fester in this hotel, the biases that go unchecked, the assumptions made about people based on the way they look or where they come from. And it ends now." The lobby was still, the weight of her words settling on every employee present. Veronica's voice rang out again, firm and clear, as she addressed the rest of the staff. "Starting tomorrow morning, there will be mandatory training on bias, discrimination, and customer service ethics for every employee, from the front desk to management. If anyone here refuses to participate, they will no longer work for me." The staff stood frozen, no one daring to speak. The tension was palpable, the reality of the change sinking in. This wasn't just a one-off incident, Veronica was laying the groundwork for a fundamental shift in how things were done at the Grand Palace. Amanda swallowed hard, clearly struggling with the enormity of her mistake, but Veronica wasn't done. She turned toward the two security guards who had been called to escort Elijah out earlier. "Tell me," Veronica said sharply, her eyes flicking from one guard to the other, "when Amanda asked you to remove Elijah, did you question it?" Neither guard spoke immediately, their gazes dropped to the floor, ashamed, but they didn't have an answer. "That's the problem," Veronica continued, her voice cold. "You didn't question it. You didn't think twice. You simply followed orders because you assumed that what was being asked of you was justified. Well, it wasn't, and from now on, if anyone here fails to uphold the standard of fairness and respect, they will be shown the door." The younger of the two guards took a hesitant step forward, his voice quiet. "Yes, ma'am, we understand." "Good," Veronica said, her tone softening just slightly. "You're dismissed. This is not the standard we will accept here." Turning back to Amanda, Veronica's expression remained stone cold. "You have 10 minutes to clear out your office," she said, her voice still unwavering. "If you're still here after that, security will escort you out. You've shown me that you can't be trusted with this position anymore." Amanda's eyes went wide, her body stiffening as she processed the words. There was no room for negotiation, no second chance. Her fall from grace was swift, and there was no way to reverse it. I didn't mean to," Amanda began, but Veronica cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Don't try to justify it," she said, her voice low. "You've done enough damage. Leave." With that, Amanda turned, her face a mask of disbelief and humiliation, and retreated toward the employee corridor. It was clear she had nothing left to say. The tension in the room finally broke, the staff breathing out in relief as the inevitable had unfolded. Veronica stood there for a moment, surveying the room. She had done what was necessary, but she knew the work was far from over. As Elijah looked on, he could see the quiet power his mother wielded. It wasn't just about owning a luxury hotel, it was about creating a space where dignity, respect, and equality were the core values, and she wasn't going to let anyone, staff or guest, forget that. When Amanda had disappeared from view, Veronica turned to Elijah. "Let's go," she said softly, her tone warm now. "You've waited long enough." Elijah nodded and picked up his suitcase. They walked toward the elevator together, the weight of the moment hanging between them. The Grand Palace Hotel would never be the same, and neither would its guests or its staff. Veronica Turner was not just an owner, she was a force to be reckoned with. As the elevator doors closed behind them, the future of the hotel and of the people within it felt undeniably different. For the first time in a long while, Elijah felt as though his presence was no longer just tolerated, it was accepted. He belonged.